Hello everyone. In this lecture, we will be looking at the social and psychological factors that can help explain the development of deviant behavior. Okay, it is the second part of 3 lectures that look at the theories of crime or the factors that contribute to the development of criminal behaviors. Now, social risk factors are any circumstances that may increase the child's likelihood of engaging in behaviors. Risk factors in this sense function in a cumulative fashion. That is, the greater number of risk factors, the greater the likelihood that the child will engage in one behavior. We know that there is evidence to support that problem behaviors associated with risk factors such as family, school, peer group influence, and the community tend to cluster around each other. For example, infancy and violence cluster with other problems such as drug use, teen pregnancy, and school misbehavior. It is important to note, however, there is a difference between cause and risk factors. A cause-effect mindset, on the other hand, is too easy to assume that the existence of a risk factor inevitably leads to criminality. That is, a risk factor is not the same as a cause, which means that just because a child is at risk due to his family environment, it doesn't mean that he will necessarily grow up to become a criminal. For example, we know that poverty affects the development of behavior. However, many poor people do not engage in crime, and some rich people do. It therefore does not mean that if you're poor, you will commit crime. But what it does mean is that the chances of you committing crimes are high. We know that the social factors that are listed in this screen are especially important in a child's formative years. In fact, research has suggested that experiences in their first 4 years of life is one of the greatest predictors of the development of antisocial behaviors in later years. When analyzing risk factors for delinquent behaviors from a social perspective, we can examine them from the perspective of the 4 entities presented on the screen, which are, as I mentioned earlier, family, school, influence of peer group, and community. Let's look at each of them in more detail in the subject. In terms of family influences, we know that parents involved, which includes the family's history of problematic behavior, is a risk factor for children. It is, however, difficult to fully say that it is a social risk factor because it is difficult to separate the influence of nature versus nurture in this sense, or when it comes to this factor. We also know that the presence of poor intra-family relationships as displayed through poor attachment or bonding with the parent during the early years is a risk factor for delinquency. Poor parent supervision or monitoring, especially during later childhood and adolescence, is another factor that has been linked to the development of deviant behaviors. This is unsurprising, especially if the child is mixing with delinquent peers unsupervised and is able to do whatever she or he likes. We also know that families or children who come from families that have higher levels of conflict and or also come from a broken home are at higher risk for engaging in delinquent behaviors, again, especially if they are mixing with delinquent peers. Finally, children who are exposed to violence at a very young age or children who are victimized, especially children who are victimized or abused, are likely to repeat the cycle of violence themselves as they grow up. Similarly, children who witness their mothers being the victim of spousal abuse are likely to learn that violent behaviors are acceptable. Children who are also subjected to harsh punishment or erratic discipline strategies are likely to display similar harsh interactions or aggressive interactions with their peers outside the home. Okay, in terms of attachment styles, for example, we know that children who have an avoidant attachment style have a higher likelihood of growing up to become sex offenders. This does not mean all of them will become sex offenders, but it does mean that convicted sex offenders tend to have avoidant attachment styles at an early age. What happens then is that they try to demonstrate the missing attachment through sexual offending because they are unable to form lasting relationships, but they do want the sexual contact, they choose to sexually offend. Many victims of interpersonal violence often have anxious attachment styles where their fear of loss or separation results in strong feelings of anxiety or rage when they themselves are involved in romantic relationships, and therefore their feelings of insecurity may manifest itself through violence, especially when they feel their partner is moving away from them. In terms of parenting styles, we know that parents who are extremely authoritative and who don't ignore even trivial behaviors, who issue many commands, use verbal threats, but don't consistently and effectively back up their verbal threats, often result in them being unable to discipline their children effectively. This sometimes leads to children exhibiting coercive behaviors and getting out of control. Similarly, parents who are very permissive in their parenting style are often not attuned to what is problematic in their children's behavior, and they allow their child to get away with more and more without punishment. The child slowly learns to generalize these behaviors outside the home environment in interactions in school and other social settings. As mentioned earlier, poverty is a risk factor, but it is not a major contributing factor. In fact, research has shown poverty does not cause serious or chronic offending. The majority of poor children and adults are law-abiding citizens, and children and adults from families of high economic status do engage in serious delinquency and crime as well. At a macro level, it's been found that income inequality in society is actually a strong predictor of crime than its gross domestic product of the country in itself. What this means is that if there is a wide divide between the rich and poor, there is likely to be higher levels of crime within that society. Some other family risk factors that may influence the development of delinquencies are things like maternal depression, alcoholism, sibling antisocial behavior, which is similar to the influence of delinquent peers, and lower levels of parental education or literacy. School is another strong influence for many children and adolescents. In terms of school, some of the specific factors or areas that may influence the development of delinquent behaviors is firstly the quality of preschool experience. We know that the quality of childcare is important, especially in the earliest years of a child's life. And this is becoming more and more important as there are more dual income families where both parents work and children are not cared for by the mother as their main caregiver. Research has shown that poorer quality childcare is linked to poorer language, cognitive and social development. Children who are exposed to aggression in their childcare centres are also likely to exhibit abusive behaviours themselves. Children who do not attend childcare but are instead latchkey kids, for example, exhibit more independence at a young age but also at higher risk for developing problem behaviours in early adolescence. Academic achievement in school is another factor that does influence the development of delinquent behaviours. Some countries still practice the process of retaining children in kindergarten or primary school when they feel that the child has not developed sufficient skills to progress to the next level. While there may be benefits in doing this, academically, the long-term developmental effects on the child is often negative. where children who are retained in their early grades often result in more aggressive and bullying type behaviors, as they are likely to be rejected by their peers as well. In terms of reading levels, we know that students with higher reading levels are less likely to. Unsurprisingly, children who have a negative attitude towards school are more likely to skip school and be frequently absent from school. This may result in them being suspended from school, and sometimes, or in relation to this, or perhaps independently, they are also more likely to drop out from school. Finally, the overall education system in terms of the school climate, whether it is a caring or punishing climate, whether kids are negatively labeled by the teachers or identified as learning disabled at a young age, may also influence the development of delinquent behaviors. That is, children who grow up in or who attend schools that have a more unforgiving climate are less likely to develop pro-social school-related attitudes. They are then likely to have negative attitudes towards school. Similarly, children who are labeled as stupid or learning disabled or unable to cope with the demands of the school system are also likely to develop negative attitudes towards school, and this would then impact on their performance in school, which then, if they don't do well in school, increases their chances of failing in school, dropping out of school, and mixing with delinquent peers or finding other ways to cope with not being able to fit in with the demands of society. We know that mixing with specifically in peer groups is actually one of the strongest predictors of antisocial behavior, especially in young children. Children who are or youth who mix with peer groups are likely to become against themselves. One reason for this is antisocial groups seek out similar peer-rejected peers, and then this in turn amplifies their deviant tendencies when they come together as a group. Those who may not be deviant in themselves but mix or interact a lot with other peers who are in gangs are likely to subscribe to the values and the beliefs of gangs and become gang members themselves. Peer rejection, especially at an early age, also has detrimental effects on children. We know that early peer rejected children tend to gravitate towards one another, and they may then bond together to become more violent and aggressive as a group than they would be as an individual. However, this is a chicken and egg situation because perhaps they were already more violent and aggressive to start with, and that's why they were rejected by their peers. This is an area that needs more research so we can understand the direction of causality in this relationship. In terms of the larger community, some of the factors that influence the development of delinquent behaviors are, for example, the availability of substances such as drugs and alcohol for the delinquent to experiment with or eventually get hooked onto, as well as the availability of firearms, especially when we're looking at the rates of more violent crimes. Individuals who grow up in societies with higher crime rates are also more likely to be involved in crime themselves, especially if the crime rates within their particular neighborhood is much higher. Finally, children who grow up in more stable or cohesive community who feel safe within their communities are less likely to be involved in criminal behaviors. When trying to understand the influence of social risk factors on the development of delinquent behaviors, it sometimes helps to look at it also within the context of the development of brain functioning and how we mature as individuals. One theory that looks at this is the dual systems model of adolescent risk taking. Basically, What this theory proposes is that risky behavior is a result of developmental changes in the frontal cortex, which includes the amygdala, that controls social emotional functioning. By social emotional functioning, refer to the social emotional systems which include reward seeking, emotional arousal, and stimulation seeking. Um, these functions usually mature by the time the person is 14 years old, and its interaction with our cognitive functions or cognitive controls of executive functions such as reasoning, logic, abstract thinking, self-control, and problem solving. This usually matures much later in young adulthood. And the fact that adolescents at a young age, 14 years old, are motivated by their social emotional system to seek rewards, to be emotionally aroused, and to be stimulated by high sensation seeking environments, and yet they do not have the actual maturity to logically think through the consequences, could help to explain why adolescents engage in more risky behaviors between the ages of 14 to 18 years old, because I mentioned earlier they do not fully have the executive, or their executive functions have not fully matured yet. Social learning theories propose that all behavior is learned, they're not genetically programmed. This includes techniques of committing crime, our rationalizations, and attitudes towards crime. So, for example, if somebody who peddles drugs to earn a quick buck instead of working legitimately is rewarded for peddling drugs, he or she is likely to repeat the behavior. However, if she or he is punished for peddling drugs at an early age, he or she is unlikely to repeat the behavior and is more likely to avoid the behavior. Social learning theorists propose that adults learn to choose values through the processes of imitation modeling, that is, people learn to engage in fun through association with others as a form or as a result of it suggests that societies that punish antisocial behaviors that individuals can observe through the actions of their parents, their teachers, and peers would lead to individuals less likely to be involved in criminal activity. Criminal activity is therefore seen as the result of the failure of the socialization process to stop immature tendencies, especially immature tendencies in individuals who focus more on immediate self-gratification instead of long-term gratification. Other researchers have suggested that this theory is only useful in explaining antisocial behavior or development of criminal behavior if we are able to specify specific conditions in which criminal behavior is learned. Social learning theories specify that when criminal behavior is reinforced, individuals acquire favorable attitudes towards crime, and they start to believe that criminal behavior is favorable or at least justifiable under certain conditions. And criminality is therefore learned when there are more favorable than unfavorable definitions that an individual holds true to violating the law. This suggests that criminal behavior is not learned in large group settings. Instead, it is learned in small, informal group settings, and it doesn't just happen through one experience or one interaction, but instead it develops from the collective experiences of an individual over time that are linked to specific situational events. Social learning theorists also suggest that criminal behavior doesn't occur randomly. Instead, it is goal-directed. That is, individuals engage in criminal behavior because there is a specific goal that they want to achieve at the end of it. This may include monetary gain, acceptance by peer group, power, and so on. One explanation for why In summary, Agnews' general strain theory proposes that people who are treated badly are likely to feel some sort of strain or have a negative emotional reaction. As a means to deal with this strain or negative emotional reaction, they resort to aggression and crime as they find it to be a useful coping mechanism for themselves. It proposes that there are two main categories of strain: subjective strain. Objective strains are strains which most people find to be unacceptable. For example, situations in which people have sufficient food or have adequate shelter over a prolonged period of time. Subjective strains, on the other hand, strains that may be seen as negative for one person but not necessarily another. So, for example, not getting a particular job may be perceived as a strain for one individual but not necessarily for another individual. Now, he proposes that these strains could result in three things. Strains that result in category 1 consequences are strains that prevent the achievement of positively valued goals for the individual. This could be caused by a mismatch between the aspirations and expectations of the individual, a mismatch between the achievements and expectations of the individual, or a mismatch between what is perceived to be a fair outcome and the actual outcome. Category 2 strains is what occurs when someone removes something that's highly valued. For example, when a romantic partner pulls out of a relationship. And finally, category 3 strains are strains that threaten or subject the individual to negative stimuli. In extreme cases, they may include things like sexual or physical abuse. It could also include things like discrimination or negative stereotyping. Agnew proposes that there are certain strains that are more likely to be related to delinquency, and some of them are listed on this slide here. He suggests that children or individuals who are exposed to these strains for prolonged periods of time are especially likely to be involved in delinquent behaviors. These strains include being subjected to child abuse or neglect, harsh or erratic parenting style, rejection by parents, especially at an early age, homelessness at any age, unemployment or poor quality employment. Now, this is dependent on the person's perception, of course, of what is poor and good quality employment, and the failure to obtain goals easily through legitimate means. For example, if they are unable to earn a decent living by getting what they consider to be good quality employment, but instead are able to earn money through illegitimate means such as peddling drugs or loan sharking, they are more likely to then engage in peddling drugs or loan sharking as a form of criminal behavior when they cannot obtain the goals that they want legitimately, even after trying to do so. He also suggests that deviancy is a more likely response to strain when the strain is perceived as being unjust, when it is extreme either in terms of its magnitude or duration, when a person is younger and lacks the appropriate social controls, or when the person has models for deviant coping strategies that are easily accessible and finds that the role model that they are imitating is usually successful in achieving his or her goals through illegitimate means. Some of the psychological risk factors that put somebody at higher risk for being involved in delinquent behaviors is having a lack of empathy, and this is particularly evident in psychopaths or violent offenders who have low levels of effective empathy. I won't go through this in detail now because we will be looking at it in more detail when we have the lecture on psychopaths. Individuals who have cognitive and language deficiencies, which result in them having problems expressing themselves. Having issues with frustration and conflict resolution in others also puts them at higher risk for delinquent behaviors, particularly if they are male. Finally, we know that there is an indirect causal relationship that is inverse in nature between intelligence and involvement in crime. That is, often those who have lower levels of IQ are more likely to be involved in crime, as are people who suffer from attention deficit hyperactive disorder. This may also be linked to their performance in school and academic achievement, which is something that we discussed earlier in today's lecture. Next slide, now I want to go into the relationship between IQ and offending behavior in a little bit more detail, because this is something that's often confused in the popular media. We know that low IQ, especially low IQ, when somebody has lower levels of IQ between the ages of 8 and 10, have been persistently linked to criminal behavior and higher levels of conviction, especially when it comes to violent offenders. But what we do need to pay attention to is that the low IQ levels is not something that's just biological, which means that just because somebody is born with a low IQ or comes from a family with a history of low IQ, it doesn't mean they themselves are going to have low IQ, because IQ levels are also mediated by life experiences, exposure to proper nutrition, educational opportunities, and family influences. As mentioned earlier, ADHD is also a psychological risk factor for the development of delinquent behaviors. This could be due to the fact that those who have ADHD have lower levels of self-regulation and are usually motivated by short-term gratification. Therefore, they are more likely to be involved with delinquent behaviors if they see it as a quick fix or quick way to achieve their goals. They're also more likely to be involved in substance abuse and to grow dependent on substances, as they may not think of the long-term consequences of these actions. We know that children who exhibit symptoms of conduct disorder, or those who are conduct disorder or oppositional defiance disorder, or those who are diagnosed with conduct disorder and oppositional defiance disorder, are also more likely to develop deviant behaviors or to be involved in deviant behaviors as they grow older. Conduct disorder specifically has been linked to repetitive and persistent behaviors that violates the right of others over time. This is something that we will examine in more detail when we look at psychopaths as well. In terms of personality, Eysenck and Eysenck in 1985 developed proposed three major dimensions of personality: PEN, psychoticism, extroversion, and neuroticism. Basically, what they found is that the different combinations of personality scores are linked to criminal behaviors during different periods of life. But the main personality trait that actually distinguishes between a criminal and non-criminal is the levels of psychoticism, which are evident through the display of aggressive, cold, and impulsive behaviors. They then proposed that criminal behavior is possibly the result of missing socially desirable conditioning experiences, where a child wasn't exposed to positive reinforcements for pro-social behaviors and negative reinforcements or punishments for antisocial behaviors at a young age. As a result of these wrong experiences being reinforced, the child has poor conditionality, and research suggests that antisocial people and criminals especially show poor levels of conditionality, which is evident through their cognitive functioning and their responses to different environmental stimuli. If you're interested in finding out more on this topic, here are some resources that you can look at or watch for more details. Thank you.